Kia ora, good evening. Wind gusts of up to 116 kilometres per hour recorded in Invercargill in the past 24 hours have caused havoc in parts of the city, snapping power poles and felling trees onto some southern roads. Tonight, heavy snow is forecast to low levels in Southland, particularly in eastern Southland, east of Mataura and Gore. Emergency Management Southland are urging people to think twice before travelling.
That's right. Probably a good idea to go and have a check around people's properties, businesses, if there's loose iron that's come up because of the wind. Try and get it battened down, but checking trees and things like that because, there's a wee bit more wind to come and the snow's going to be a problem.
Trampolines is another thing that people have often flip on them.
It is, funnily enough. I mean, they can be quite dangerous if they're not actually secured. So those sorts of things, fencing iron, roofing iron are always a problem when you get strong winds.
There have been reports of some trees down and there's extra caution required travelling between Gore and Dunedin. Yeah,
look, especially tonight, we're advising people not to travel tonight unless you really have to, and to reassess in the morning your travel plans because there is going to be snow around tonight, especially in the hill country, and people need to make a good decision before they travel in the morning. It may be best not to actually travel depending on how heavy the snow is.
It does bring isolation issues to some people potentially. What should they be prepared for?
Well, they should be prepared for power outages. There could be some more power outages. There already has been some because of the wind. They could be isolated for a day, perhaps a couple of days. Make sure they've got their supplies in, and you just be cautious.
And those heavy winds have already caused power outages to a number of homes in the Makariwa and Grove Bush areas, with keeping PowerNet staff busy restoring power today. More than a dozen poles snapped in the strong gusty conditions in some areas, and PowerNet are urging caution.
Yeah, look, we've had a pretty difficult morning across the networks, particularly in rural Southland. So the storms and gales that came through this morning caused a bit of havoc, and close to town actually at Makariwa where we lost 17 poles. So that line is now being rebuilt. But yeah, quite a bit of damage out there this morning.
Is that something that happens quite often, that concertina effect?
It can happen, but no, it doesn't happen often, and it's obviously because of some very strong wind gusts that came through early this morning. But it's not something that happens often, but if you do get that weather, it can.
Is that a reflection on the quality of the infrastructure around that area?
No, look, we will look at that. The particular line has been there for over 20 years, so it should be up to any storm conditions. However, what we saw this morning was extreme storm conditions, especially some of the winds that came through. So it's not uncommon to see this with what was a severe weather warning that came through from Met Service.
A number of houses affected. How many, and how many are still without power?
Most are now restored, and that particular line that we're talking about at Makariwa, we've actually only got one customer left off. So the team have been doing a great job out there restoring supply and backfeeding. So, and that one customer we're supplying a generator. So, getting everyone back on as quick as we can.
Just in the cases of an emergency like this, where a power pole does come down, what is the advice to public?
The advice to public is very simple, really. Is don't go near it. Call the PowerNet 0800 number and wait for the fault response to come and make sure the site's safe. Very much public to be very cautious around, especially conductors on the ground.
Meanwhile, PowerNet staff not restoring power were at the formal announcement of a new collaborative partnership focused on safety. PowerNet and St John have announced a 3-year partnership aimed at improving public safety and first aid education in the south. After assessing what PowerNet can do to contribute to the community, it was decided St John was a very good fit, matching criteria to support communities, family, education, health and safety. The sponsorship is valued at close to $100,000 a year.
That will be initially a 3-year program, and it will target both training facilities and also training programs. So one, assisting with the assets, but also delivering programs to the communities.
As far as the public are concerned, are there any changes with St John that we can expect to see as a result of this partnership?
Well, not immediately. I think what we are looking to do is we recognise that a lot of these service organisations do find it difficult at times for funding, and assisting with that and to help them more effectively target programs to the communities and other communities in which we operate and serve. We thought it made a lot of sense.
And is staff right on board and right behind this? You are working with them in the emergency sense quite often?
Yes we do, and our paths cross quite a lot out in the communities. Some unfortunate situations where you have motor vehicle incidents and other things, but also day to day. But yeah, the PowerNet staff are very pleased with this initiative. Not all know about it. That's part of today. It's being announced to the wider workforce today.
The Southland District Health Board has reported an operating shortfall of almost $16 million for the past financial year. Papers presented to a board meeting recently show a projected end-of-year deficit of $15.7 million. The unfavourable financial position comes after the board put a freeze on hiring non-medical staff just 2 months ago, when the deficit went beyond the expected $9 million shortfall. Hospital patients could be given the opportunity to give feedback on their inpatient stay and treatment experience as part of a new survey system. A random selection of 7,500 patients who stay in hospital at least one night during the current fortnight will be sent a survey asking about their stay. The 6-minute survey will be anonymised to encourage patients to talk freely about their experiences, included whether they were involved in decision-making about their treatment to whether they understood advice given by doctors. Responses will be collated to give each DHB a rating out of 10 in coordination, partnership, communication, as well as physical and emotional needs. Stay with us. After the break, learner drivers face more restrictions and a climate change activist warns of implications of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Welcome back. The Invercargill City Council is continuing to research its files for any complex building projects that engineer Anthony Major may have been involved with. Last month, Mr Major was expelled from the Institution of Professional Engineers New Zealand, or IPENZ, after they deemed his work on the first stadium negligent and incompetent. The first stadium Southland collapsed under the weight of snow in September 2010. City Council has asked for assistance from designers and builders on any projects Mr Major may have been involved with that had complex engineering issues. To date, 6 replies have been received. Council has written to Mr Major with a similar request, but not only covering Southland but also other parts of New Zealand. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has advised they will be writing to Mr Major requesting the same information. Greg Rezniewski of the Motueka-based Climate Action Group was yesterday guest speaker at an Invercargill Youth Council forum on Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations and how it affects the regulatory standards of local government. He says there must be further investigation into the potential implications for local government should New Zealand become a signatory to the TPP agreement.
If we sign up to what's called investor-state dispute settlement regime that is offered in the TPP, it tends to have a limiting effect on government legislation and decisions, and that's been proved in hundreds of cases. The most recent case and most pertinent to us currently is in terms of our smoke-free 2025 policy and plain packaging on tobacco. And we're learning from the experience in Australia where they implemented that plain packaging in 2012, that Philip Morris, a large tobacco company, is very adverse to that and is suing the Australian government under an investment agreement that they have with Hong Kong. John Key, back in 2012, said that New Zealand did not have a free trade agreement that would limit the government's ability to legislate smoke-free. However, earlier this year, he's parked that legislation, saying that he's waiting to see what happens with Australia and Philip Morris. The thing that strikes me is that John Key and the national government have used urgency on a number of occasions to push through legislation to favour their cause, right? However, in respect to smoke-free and plain packaging, they parking it or by parking it are actually assisting Philip Morris. If they had used urgency and said, we'll go ahead with this, we are committed to this policy and put it in place, That would have sent a signal to the world, to the Investor State Dispute Settlement Tribunal and others, that smoke-free and plain packaging are a legitimate government policy and they shouldn't be tampering with it.
Are you and your organisation against free trade agreements?
We are very much for fair trade. We want New Zealand to be able to exchange with the world and get a fair price for the produce that it supplies to the world, and we want New Zealand to be able to pay a fair price for the produce that it gains from the rest of the world. We're not per se against free trade, okay? We're not against free trade agreements. The question is always, in an agreement, what are the terms? Okay? So if the terms are disadvantaging the majority of New Zealanders as opposed to the trade interests, then you've really got to question what is being put forward as the New Zealand national interest in these things.
Time limits have been set for new learner and restricted car and motorbike licences to encourage drivers to move to the next licence stage within 5 years. Improving the safety of novice drivers is behind moves that will see expiry dates set for learners drivers. Drivers or riders who don't move into the next stage of driver licensing within 5 years will need to pass another theory test after it expires. Changes work with other measures introduced over the years to improve novice drivers, including raising the minimum licensing age from 15 to 16, the introduction of zero alcohol limit for teen drivers, and more challenging practical driving tests. The new rules come into force on December 1st. Latest figures show that more New Zealanders are comfortable with accessing Inland Revenue's services online. From April to July, 20,000 more New Zealanders used Inland Revenue's online service to file their tax returns than the same period last year, taking the total to more than 150,000. More than 1 million Kiwis have registered for Inland Revenue's secure digital identification service, Voice D. Revenue Minister Todd McClay says technical initiatives are continuing to improve efficiencies, with $4.2 billion of child support, student loan and tax debt collected in the year to June, up $754 million on the previous year. And that's all from the news desk. Next on Sport Tonight, highlights from Southland Division 1 Club Rugby Final from the news team. Good night.